You know what they say. The road.
Once your arbitration runs look like this, you're in the right place. By the end, you'll know every squad role, the strongest builds, and hidden techs most players don't know, like locking your defense operator in place so they don't wander into danger and ruin your run. So why even do meta arbitrations in the first place? Because when run correctly, they're arguably the most profitable mode in the game, only really being rivaled by Void Cascade Fissures. The main reward is Vitus Essence. On good tile sets, a clean meta run can hit roughly 500 to 700 Vitus per hour. Most players convert that directly into Kuva, either for personal Rivens or rolling for profit, which comes out to around 250k Kuva per hour. And unlike the Teshin shop, the Vitus store is fully uncapped. On top of that, you're getting massive amounts of endo. I've pulled in around 400k endo in the last month just from meta arbitrations. And if you don't want Kuva, you can always sell galvanized mods for steady profit. So, how does this all work? Meta arbitrations follow a simple loop. 2 players focus on damage, clearing drones and enemies, grabbing Vitus, and returning to the camp spot before repeating the cycle. The other 2 players provide support, buffing damage, fire rate, and ammo drops to keep the DPS at full efficiency. Now let's dive into each role, and of course, the best builds for each. The primary DPS is usually Saryn with the Kuva Ogris, and the mod Nightwatch Napalm. The Ogris is by far the best weapon for arbitrations. Nightwatch Napalm leaves behind a lingering damage zone that kills enemies the moment they spawn. No other weapon comes close. Depending on tile set, Cyte 09 can also serve as the primary DPS. We'll cover that later. The secondary DPS is Mirage. Like Saryn, she also nukes enemies with a Napalm Ogris. Wisp is the primary support. Her job is to buff fire rate, increase the squad's health for Arcane Bellicose, and provide a strong roar buff to the entire team. Volt fills the final support slot. Their role is to generate ammo through Subsumed Dispensary and buff reload speed plus movement. Before we get into individual builds, it's important to understand the 2 phases of meta arbitrations, the setup phase and the nuking phase. During the setup phase, you do not want to trigger the mission. Enemies will start spawning immediately if you do. The goal here is to place any specters you're using and get Wisp's moats set up across all the camp spots. For defense missions, stay away from the operative. Getting too close will start the mission. For Interception, don't fully capture any flags. Enemies begin spawning as soon as the flag is fully secured. The nuking phase is exactly what it sounds like. This is when the mission officially starts, and the squad begins nuking enemies and buffing each other. One last thing before the builds. This secondary and melee setup applies to every role in meta arbitrations. We used the Icarius Prime. Here's the build. Wisp is the only frame that actively uses the secondary. For everyone else, the full build doesn't matter. The only thing you need is Amalgam Barrel Diffusion for faster Vitus looting. For melee, every role runs Praetos for the parkour bonuses. The build itself doesn't matter, but modding for maximum attack speed is best. Let's start with builds for Volt. This is the most straightforward role, so I recommend starting here if you're new to meta arbitrations. For Volt, we subsume Dispensary over his 4th ability to provide ammo and energy for the squad. Power Donation is our aura, and every build I showcase will use it. When the entire squad runs Power Donation, everyone gains 60% ability strength, including Specters, boosting them to 220% strength. Extremely powerful. The Volt build focuses on high duration, with as much ability strength as possible for Dispensary. That's why we run Precision Intensify. Higher strength increases the chances of extra ammo drops. If your Dispensary strength is too low, your DPS teammates will eventually run out of ammo. Arcane Concentration is flexible. You can swap it for Multificiency, but Concentration is the option I personally prefer. For Shards, we run 5 Tau ability strength shards. The main weapon for Volt is also the Kuva Ogris. You won't use it much, since Saryn and Mirage will be nuking nearly every enemy. However, it's still useful if enemies slip out of spawn, or while your DPS players are looting. Here's the Ogris build. Just know this Ogris build is only for Volt, so we're keeping it brief. The Saryn and Mirage Ogris builds are where the real depth is, and I'll fully explain those when we get there. Also be sure to set the energy color on your Ogris to black. This prevents you from blinding your teammates. For the Progenitor, go with either Toxin or Cold, then pair it with the matching 60/60 mod to create Viral. In my case, I use Rime rounds, since I have a Toxin Progenitor. If you had a Cold Progenitor, you'd use the 60/60 Toxin mod instead. Focus School isn't critical here, but I run Vazarin for Protective Sling. This helps keep the defense operator alive if it gets bugged or overrun. As I mentioned in the intro, I'll show how to properly anchor the operative in the How to Play Defense section. Now that you've got the strongest builds for Volt, let's see how to actually play him in a Meta Arbitration run. In the setup phase, call in any Specters if you're using them, then cast Dispensary at the camp spot, so Wisp can collect energy orbs to proc energy conversion. On the S-tier tile set, the optimal camp spot is right here, and for Hydron, you'll want to use this spot. For Volt, the nuking phase is very straightforward. First, tap your 1 to proc Arcane Concentration, then cast Dispensary, followed by casting your 2 to buff everyone's reload speed. Finally, hold cast your first ability for Shock Trooper. From there, just make sure everyone in the squad has both the reload and Shock Trooper buffs. You can check in the top right of your UI. If someone didn't get buffed, just recast until the whole squad is covered. Now let's move on to Wisp, the main support. Her job is simple but powerful. Buff fire rate, give a strong roar buff to the squad, buff allies with the Aphentis, and boost everyone's health so they can take full advantage of Arcane Bellicose. For Wisp, I'll actually showcase 2 builds, but I recommend starting with the first one if you're new to Meta Arbitrations, as it's much easier to play. For her first build, we focus on maximum ability strength with a little duration. Emerald Fiber and Vitality can be used unranked to save capacity. The range on Piercing Roar is nice, but it's mainly there because it allows you to recast Roar if someone misses the buff. The shards are 5 Tau ability strength shards. These are extremely important to the build. For the second Wisp build, it's the same idea with max strength and a little duration, and you gain 22% ability strength compared to the first build, but it's more difficult to play as there's many more buffs you have to manage. Only use this if you're confident you can hit all the buffs. Otherwise, I recommend the first build for most players. The main weapon for Wisp isn't the Ogris, it's the Aphentis. Its alternate fire buffs your allies' fire rate, reload speed, and max ammo for 40 seconds, as long as they get a kill within the radius. This makes it an incredibly strong team buff. The Aphentis build doesn't need to be complicated. You just want maximum fire rate, so you can cast the alt fire faster, and reload speed, since the alt fire reloads slowly. For your secondary, like I showed earlier, go with the Icarius Prime. Here's the build. It won't be used a whole lot, since your DPS should be nuking everything, but it's useful if your DPS players are busy looting. For focus, run Matarai for the 40% sling strength bonus, and a Nidus Specter. Both of these are required for Wisp. One quick tip for Wisp. Avoid using shock motes during your runs. They can tank your frame rate, and sometimes even cause enemies to bug out, so it's best to skip them entirely. Now let's show exactly how to play Wisp during your runs. Wisp is the busiest frame during the setup phase, since most of this time is spent getting all her motes in place. First, make sure energy conversion is active. This will be easy if your Volt has casted Dispensary. If they haven't, just remind them in chat. Next, call in your Nidus Specter. Once it links to you, you get a huge ability strength bonus. Make sure to hold its position so it doesn't wander off. I'll cover exact Specter Loadouts in the advanced section. After linking, do a couple Void Slings to activate the 40% Matarai strength bonus, then use your operator ability for Molt Vigor. Now you're ready to cast your health mote. On the S tier tile set, place it on this box, the primary camp spot. Repeat the process for your haste motes. On Hydron, this box and middle area are the most common camp spots. If you're unsure, check with your DPS where they want motes placed. If you're using the second Wisp build, casting the health mote triggers Archon Intensify, giving you just 10 seconds to do everything again for the haste mote. With the first build, you don't need to worry about this. During the nuking phase, wait for the Nidus Specter to link again, then cast Roar and use the Aphentis Altfire near your DPS. You'll see a little spear around it. Make sure your DPS is inside, or they won't get the buff. Roar and Aphentis both last about 40 seconds, so once Roar expires, it's time to throw Aphentis again. That's it for Wisp. Keep an eye on the top right of your UI to make sure everyone always has Roar active. This is very important. One pro tip for Wisp. After casting Roar, move away from Nidus to break the link. The cooldown is about 25 seconds, so by the time Roar is about to expire, Nidus will link again, giving your squad super strong Roar buffs every time. Let's move on to our primary DPS, Saryn. Saryn has the highest damage potential and the best scaling at higher levels, thanks to Toxic Lash. Toxic Lash applies directly to Nightwatch Napalm on the Kuva Ogris, adding toxin procs that deal insane damage. There's a new Saryn build now after the Old Piece update that uses some new synergies and arcanes. First, the shards. I recommend 3 toxin damage shards. These directly boost the toxin procs from Toxic Lash, and since Toxic Lash applies to Napalm, this massively increases damage. The remaining 2 shards are flexible. I run double parkour shards myself. Now for the build. Some of the mod slots are flexible, so don't feel you have to copy this exactly. We subsume energized munitions over Saryn's 4th ability, letting you spam the Ogris without ammo issues. Primed Flow and Equilibrium might seem a bit out of place at first. Primed Flow gives us more energy for primary overcharge on the Ogris, letting us hit 300% multi-shot whenever we're above 90% energy. Equilibrium keeps our energy topped up, making it much easier to stay above that 90% threshold for overcharge. Contagion Cloud is included for lingering damage. If you're new to DPS, I strongly recommend it. It makes spotting enemies much faster and easier. More experienced players can swap it for narrow-minded to boost duration. Personally, I'm still 50-50 on this. Now let's address the elephant in the room, Prime Sure-Footed. If you don't have it, no worries. There are several good alternatives. The simplest is regular Sure-Footed, paired with Fortitude for 100% knockdown resistance. I'd remove either Natural Talent or Contagion Cloud for this setup. If you don't want to give up any mod slots, Dante Spectre is a solid choice. With everyone running Power Donation, it gives you and your squad about 33,000 Overguard. Now onto the Ogris build. The ideal progenitor element is Cold. This is because Toxin mods directly boost Toxic Lash, and with a Cold progenitor, those Toxin mods combine into Viral, the strongest general element in the game. If we used a Toxin progenitor, we'd have to use Cold mods to make Viral, which don't boost Toxic Lash. You might be wondering why we're using a rank 6 heavy caliber instead of rank 10. Rank 10 gives the biggest AoE, but the added accuracy penalty can cause you to miss spawn points, which slows clear times. Rank 6 gives the best balance between AoE and accuracy. Before we move on, I want to explain one very important mod interaction, Adhesive Blast. Adhesive Blast increases the uptime of Nightwatch Napalm, but it comes with a downside. It reduces your initial shot coverage. However, there is a way around this, where you keep full initial coverage and get the extra delayed explosion. Let me show you. Here, I've equipped Adhesive Blast with no other mods. This gives us a base multi-shot of 1. As you can see, most of the initial shots don't explode. Instead, we only get the Ogris explosion 4 seconds later from Adhesive Blast. Now here's where it gets interesting. Adhesive Blast scales with multi-shot. So now I'll add primary overcharge and multi-shot mods. And as you can see, all of the initial shots are exploding, and we still get the delayed explosion 4 seconds later. So what does this mean? Adhesive Blast, when paired with a high multi-shot Ogris, like when using primary overcharge, gives you massively higher AoE coverage with Nightwatch Napalm. This is far stronger than lower multi-shot setups, like primary Merciless. For Rivens, the best stats for Saryn are Toxin, projectile speed, and magazine capacity, in that order. Strong third options include multi-shot and faction damage. Also make sure your Ogris energy color is set to black. This will prevent it from blinding you and your team. For focus, go Matarai or Zeneric if your other DPS isn't running it. This will buff Wisp at the start. Only one DPS needs to run Zeneric. The other can stick with Matarai. We'll cover Wisp's buffs in more detail shortly. Now let's look at how to play Saryn in each phase. Everything I show here will also apply to Mirage. They play nearly identical. During the setup phase, as DPS, there's not much to do. Drop any Specters if you're using them, and use a Zeneric Hardened Wellspring at the camp spot. This gives Wisp a 20% strength and duration boost for her motes. Only one DPS needs to handle this, the other can run Matarai. For the nuking phase, let's start with the S-tier tileset. DPS Saryn here is straightforward. For your first few runs, just use your damage abilities and spam the Ogris at the red spawn points. The spawns are easy to learn for this tile, and Contagion Cloud makes spotting enemies even faster. Over time, this will become second nature. Pro tip for this tile set: bring the Mantis landing craft. Its air support, Med Tower, can be placed directly on the box, giving you an elevated position that makes nuking enemies much easier. For Hydron, the approach is the same. Aim at the red dots and learn the spawns as you go. This tile set does have a few tricky spawn points that can't be hit from the main camp spot. You'll need to move occasionally to reach them. This is why Cyte is actually the best DPS for this tile, and several others. He can hit any spawn from anywhere. I'll cover Cyte in more detail after Mirage. Here's the real skill gap for an Ogris DPS. It's not aim or mechanical skill, it's movement and looting efficiency. The best DPS players will nuke enemies, loot Vitus at the optimal time, and return to the camp spot as fast as possible for the next waves. Timing your Vitus looting is crucial, especially for DPS. On defense, loot at the end of every 1 to 2 waves, then get back to camp. For Interception, it's trickier since there's no natural break in spawns, but follow a similar rhythm. With experience, you'll instinctively know when to loot and when to hold off. Just remember, Warframe caps the number of resources that can spawn at once. If you see Vitus drops despawning, that's your cue to increase your looting frequency. For the Mirage build, like Saryn, we use energized munitions to enable Ogris spam. You can subsume it over her 2nd or 4th ability. We also run Total Eclipse to buff the squad's damage, and this applies to your clones as well. Since we're running narrow-minded, I include Stretch to increase the range of Eclipse. Without it, the buff radius drops to about 5 meters, making it hard to reliably buff your teammates. A quick quality of life tip for Mirage: invert her abilities. This lets you just tap her 3rd ability to get the damage buff, instead of holding to cast every time. For shards, I'm running 2 parkour, 2 casting, and 1 electric shard. This is the Rivenless Ogris build for Mirage. Make sure you're using a Toxin Progenitor. That combines with your electric shard to form Corrosive, saving you a mod slot. If you're wondering why Heavy Caliber is only rank 6, or why we're running Adhesive Blast, I explain both in detail in the Saryn Ogris section. As for playing Mirage, her setup and nuking phases are basically identical to Saryn. If you've already watched the Saryn section, you're good to go. If not, the timestamp on screen will take you there. And finally, Cyte, our last build, and an alternative primary DPS. For Cyte, instead of a Kuva Ogris, we use the Kuva Sobek, thanks to his synergy with the Acid Shells mod. Quick disclaimer: at the time of recording, Acid Shells only works if you're the host. so only play Cyte when you're hosting the game. For shards, I'm using 3 electric shards and 2 parkour shards. The electric shards are important because they buff resupply, which is one of the only things that buffs acid shells. For Cyte's build, we subsume Nourish over his 4th ability, and build for high strength and duration. Range does not matter. Cyte's first ability only shows about 3 meters of punch through in the mod screen, but that's only body punch through against enemies. His punch through across terrain is actually infinite. As a Cyte DPS, you're expected to know every enemy spawn point, which is why we completely dump range in the build. For the rest of the build, Primed Flow increases the multi-shot bonus from primary overcharge. I'll explain that more when we look at the Sobek build. Vigilante Pursuit gives enemy radar, which is an extremely important stat for Cyte. Ice Spring can be replaced with Primed Continuity, depending on preference. This is the Sobek build I use. For the Progenitor, I recommend Cold, since this will combine with your electric shards into magnetic. Resupply is a forced proc on each hit, so you'll still get plenty of electric procs. We're also running the new primary overcharge for the multi-shot bonus. And if you don't have a Riven, replace it with Shotgun Barrage. An ideal Riven would have electricity, fire rate, and faction damage, with a harmless negative. Now let's talk about how to play Cyte. Like the other DPS roles, there isn't much you'll do during the setup phase. The nuking phase is where Cyte plays very differently from an Ogris DPS. The most important skill for Cyte, by far, is spawn knowledge. If you don't know the spawns, your Vitus rates will be very bad, especially on some of the less ideal tile sets. The only tile set I'll be showing here is the Hydron tile, since covering every tile set would make the video way too long. I don't recommend Cyte for the S tier tile set, as there are no problematic spawns for the Ogris. Everything can easily be reached from the main camp spot. Now for actually playing Cyte during the nuking phase. Start by casting Resupply, making sure it's set to electric. This will proc Arcane Concentration. Next, activate Nourish, then your first ability. Both abilities will now benefit from the increased duration from concentration. As Cyte, you always want to be shooting, even if you don't see enemies yet. Resupply allows you to reload instantly, so there's no reason to stop firing. On the Hydron tile set, just pay attention to where I'm shooting in the gameplay. You're constantly firing into spawn points and spamming your second ability. There's not much more to it than that. A properly skilled Cyte can easily outperform a Ogris DPS on any non-S tier tile set, since he can reach every spawn point instantly, but he is much more mechanically demanding to play. Now that I've showed all the roles and each build for everyone, I wanted to talk about the best companions. Sentinel and Robotic companions are off the table, since they can't use Resourceful Retriever, one of the only ways to double Vitus drops. The 2 companions I recommend are the Sahasa Kubro and Adarza Kavat. If you're an Ogris DPS, I recommend the Sahasa Kubro. Sahasa has a preset mod called Dig, which can give you energy orbs and ammo drops, extremely useful for DPS players. This is the build I use for Sahasa. You might be wondering why we're running Reinforced Bond, since we don't hit the threshold of 1200 shields. You can actually use shield restores, which boosts the shields to around 1500, activating Reinforced Bond, and this bonus will persist for the entire mission. For Wisp, I also prefer Sahasa Kubros, since it makes proccing energy conversion much easier. For Volt, you can run either a Sahasa Kubro or Adarza Kavat. Adarza provides a flat crit chance buff to everyone within 25 meters, which is a very strong support bonus. This is the build I use for Adarza. For Cyte, I also recommend Adarza Kavat for the flat crit bonus. And for Quaz, just run Elusive Posture so your companion doesn't wander off and get downed, and Bite to activate Tenacious Bond. Here are some useful optimizations before going into your missions, starting with Specter Loadouts. You'll want Nidus as your main Vapor Spectre. It's the most commonly used, and the blueprint gives you the maximum of 10 Spectres. For Phase, I recommend Dante. He's one of the most universal Spectres in the game, and still very useful in arbitrations, especially if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed. Force Spectres aren't used much, since they only craft 3 at a time, but I personally run Protea. Now for the Spectre weapons. Most players just throw on whatever they have, but this actually matters a lot. Specters share ammo drops with you, so you want to give them battery weapons. Otherwise, they'll steal your ammo, which is a big problem if you're running an Ogris. On-call crew does not share ammo like Specters do, so you can still use them normally. Throughout the video, I've been referring to certain tilesets as S tier or A tier. So how do you know which tilesets are actually good? The site on screen will show all upcoming arbitrations, months in advance, and their tier. I'll link it in the description and pinned comment. Just remember, the tiers are based on a standard Ogris setup with Saryn and Mirage. Tiles rank C or D can still become S tier with a skilled Cyte, since he can reach any spawn point. Okay, now that you know the best tiles, builds, and Specter Loadouts, let's cover a few things you should know before entering a mission. First, make sure the host has a resource drop chance booster. This boosts Vitus drops for the entire squad. You should also have a personal resource booster, which doubles your own Vitus drops. Ideally, the host should also have a resource drop chance blessing. Like the booster, this applies to the whole squad. One thing to note, if your squad was sitting in a relay when the blessing was received, it won't apply if you start the match from that relay. To fix this, transfer to a new relay from the navigation menu, and the blessing will take effect once you enter the new relay. Now that you know what to do before the mission, let's cover how to play each mission type optimally, so you know exactly what to do. I'll focus on defense and interception, since these are the best mission types for arbitrations. Let's start with defense, and as promised, I'll show how to anchor the defense operative. Normally, the defense operative follows a random teammate. This can be a problem, because he can easily get overrun and one-shotted in later waves. The solution is anchoring. This is where you lead him to a safe spot, and if done correctly, he'll stay there for the rest of the mission and won't follow anyone. Here's how we do it for the S tier tile set. First, make sure your setup phase is complete. All Specters, Wisp motes, and everything else is ready. To anchor, everyone in the squad goes into operator mode and travels to the anchor spot. For this tile set, it's usually this platform I'm standing on. Everyone waits there in operator mode. Then the host drops down and starts the mission, then returns to the platform, all while still in operator mode. Wait a bit for the operative to climb up. Once he's in position, you can switch back to your frame and start nuking from the camp spot. If done correctly, the operative will stay anchored for the rest of the mission. Just remember, no one else in the squad should go into operator mode again, or it can break the anchor and make him start following someone. A tip I like for this tile set is to drop your on-call crew here just before starting the mission. This helps nuke enemies while you're waiting, and increases your chances of success. For Hydron, it's the same process. This middle area is usually where you'll anchor, so have everyone stay here in operator mode. This is also where I like to drop my on-call crew. Once you start the mission, there's specific pathing you need to follow, so pay close attention. You'll want to start the mission from this direction while staying in operator mode, then take the stairs up to the anchor spot. If you just jump straight up to the camp spot like this, the operative won't follow you and will stay down below, so make sure you use the stairs. Once he's in position, you can switch back to your frame and you're all set. Now you know how to play defense. Let's switch to interception. The meta strategy for interception is to only capture 2 flags. This slows the mission down and allows for more Vitus drops. Think of interception like a long survival mission. On the S tier tile set, have 2 players capture the 2 flags closest to the camp spot, the ones you see here, C and D. Once those are captured, one player, usually Wisp, will neutralize one of the remaining flags to about 40 to 50%, then leave the area so it doesn't fully capture. Here's what neutralizing looks like. Capture any enemy flag until the icon turns white, then stay until it reaches around 40 to 50%, then leave. If done correctly, your team will stay just barely ahead of the enemy, and you can focus entirely on nuking until the next round. If your team is still behind in progress, wait for the enemy to recapture the flag, then neutralize it again the same way. For the Hydron tile set, capture the middle flag, and either the flag behind us or this one here. It doesn't matter which two you choose. This can vary by squad, and the rest of the process is exactly the same. A few more advanced optimizations before we wrap up the video. I'll start with Jade Pre-Buffing. This is where a player starts the mission as Jade, purely to buff Wisp's motes as much as possible, then leaves and rejoins as a DPS like Saryn or Mirage. Just make sure the Jade player is not the host, since the host leaving would cause a host migration. Because the motes of Wisp have infinite duration, these initial buffs will persist for the entire mission. Jade pre-buffing is definitely overkill for about 99% of runs, and most squads won't do this, but I still wanted to show it. Here's the Jade Pre-Buff build, with Bright Bonnet subsumed over her 4th ability. You'll also want the Arbusep Art Gun. More on that in a second. To give Wisp the strongest possible motes, start by using a Xeneric Hardened Wellspring, then place a Mushroom. Next, shoot the Mushroom with the Arbusep. This has a unique interaction with Bright Bonnet. Shooting it doubles the strength bonus, pushing it from 100 to the cap of 200%. Now activate Jade's second ability. If done correctly, you'll reach the maximum bonus of 150%, and Wisp can place her motes. Once Wisp is done setting up her motes, the Jade player can leave and rejoin as their DPS frame. And that wraps up the guide. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments, and thanks for watching.